Tonight we travel far across oceans and centuries to a quiet, rain-soaked landscape of feudal Japan. You may have heard of the samurai as warriors, but most lived not by the blade, but by the hoe, the sickle, and the tax ledger. So if you're lying down, let the sounds of this world drift in gently. The rustle of straw sandals, the soft murmur of a shrine bell in the distance, the wind brushing over cedar roofs. Tonight, we begin in the fields, where mud clings to everything, and dignity is carved from endurance. Mud, taxes, and swords, a peasant's burdens in a warrior's land. Imagine waking to the sound of bamboo clappers and the distant lowing of oxen. The sun is still hidden behind pale morning mist. Your home is a single-room hut with a thatched roof, walls of mud and wood, and a hearth that fills the air with a gentle, smoky warmth. The air is cold, but there is no time for hesitation. The season waits for no one, and in this life, the rhythm of survival is relentless. You are a farmer, perhaps born in the 1500s during the Sengoku era, a time when Japan was fractured, lawless, and ruled by warlords, or perhaps a century later under the Tokugawa shogunate, when peace came, but the hierarchy only deepened. Either way, your fate is tied to the land. Rice is not just food, it is currency, it is duty, it is control. Your hands are stained brown from the earth, your knees perpetually damp. You plant in spring, transplant seedlings by hand, wade waist-deep in paddies humming with insects, and harvest in autumn. Each motion slow, precise, and unending. Every year feels like the last, and yet each carries its own uncertainty. Floods may come, or drought. Bandits might raid, or worse, a samurai retainer might come demanding more than you owe. Because even though you work the fields, the rice you grow is not truly yours. You give a portion to your local landlord, another to the domain lord, then a share to the tax collector, often half or more of your total harvest. Sometimes it is taken in silence, other times in shame, and always without recourse. The samurai may have once been warriors, but in this era many serve as tax enforcers, administrators, or provincial bureaucrats. Their swords may be ceremonial, but their power is not. A wrong word, a late delivery, or even a perceived disrespect could bring punishment swift and quiet. And yet violence is rare. More often, it is the quiet suffocation of compliance that governs this world. But even here, even in this hard life, there is structure, there is ritual, there is meaning. Season by season, you participate in local festivals. You bow before stone shrines and leave offerings of rice or sake to the kami, the spirits of nature. You write the names of ancestors on wooden tablets. You marry, bear children, and teach them how to bind straw sandals, how to respect silence, how to kneel properly when the tax agent visits. Children begin working by age 6. Women labor alongside men. Elders pass down not wealth but discipline. At night, when the day's work ends, the village gathers quietly around fire pits or under open porches. There is little talk of rebellion, only survival and memory and acceptance. You live without mirrors, but you know your place. You own little, but what you have is shared. And despite the weight of your burdens, you endure. Because the land needs you, because the hierarchy depends on you. Because in this tightly bound world, stillness is strength. And so the days pass, one indistinguishable from the next, yet each part of a quiet story told not through heroism, but through resilience. Now let us leave the fields, and turn toward a man who shaped the very system that governed this life, a figure of patience, calculation, and order. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the general who brought peace through control. Imagine a man who waits, not for minutes or hours, but for decades. A man who survives betrayal, defeat, and loss, not by fighting harder, but by enduring longer. That man was Tokugawa Ieyasu, and his legacy would shape Japan for over 250 years. He was born in 1543 in a time of chaos, a boy caught in the whirlwind of the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period, where rival warlords vied for land, loyalty, and survival. At the age of 6, he was taken as a hostage by a rival clan, a common practice then, meant to ensure his father's obedience. He lived in castles, not as a prince, but as a prisoner, taught to bow when told, to watch in silence, and to measure his words carefully. He learned patience the hard way. As years passed, Japan remained in disarray. Great warlords rose and fell. Among them were Oda Nobunaga, fierce and ruthless, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, clever and unrelenting. Ieyasu served them both, quietly, strategically. He fought battles, yes, but more often, he observed, he built alliances not by charm, but through marriages, hostages, and calculated loyalty. He made himself useful, but never indispensable. And he waited. When Hideyoshi died, leaving behind a young heir, Ieyasu finally moved, slowly, deliberately, without rashness, but with complete certainty. At the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, he emerged victorious, not only because of strength, but because he had spent years planting seeds of distrust among his enemies. When battle came, many of their forces defected. It was over in a single day, but it had taken a lifetime to prepare. 3 years later, he was granted the title shogun by the emperor, and with that, the Tokugawa shogunate was born. But Ieyasu's brilliance was not in conquest. It was in what came after. He understood that power, once won, is fragile, so he did not simply rule. He created a system designed to endure without constant warfare, a system built on balance, order, and deeply ingrained obedience. He moved the capital to Edo, today known as Tokyo, and began an era of peace, but peace with boundaries. Daimyo, the powerful feudal lords, were required to live part-time in Edo, with their families held effectively as hostages. Travel was monitored, weapons were regulated, Christianity, which threatened the old order, was eventually banned. His laws were intricate, his surveillance subtle, his punishment swift but not always violent. It was a society where harmony was enforced through quiet control. For the samurai class, no longer needed for war, Ieyasu gave new purpose. They became bureaucrats, tax collectors, and moral examples. They wore swords still, but their battles were fought with ledgers, codes, and protocol. And for the farmers, the vast majority, life changed in a way that was less visible but no less profound. Under Ieyasu's system, they were now bound to the land. Their class was fixed, their mobility limited, their rice carefully measured, taxed, and redistributed. But they also lived in peace. For the first time in centuries, generations could live and die without the sound of battle echoing through their valleys. They could till the same soil, plant the same seed, and expect, with some certainty, that the next year would follow a familiar rhythm. This was Ieyasu's gift and his burden. He lived to the age of 73, a remarkable lifespan for his era, and after his death he was deified as a Shinto kami, a god of wisdom and guardianship. His descendants would rule Japan for over 250 years in what came to be known as the Edo period, an era of unprecedented stability and internal harmony. Yet beneath that harmony there remained tension, a rigidity that could not last forever. But for now, in this moment of our story, the land is still. The swords are sheathed, and the peasants, though burdened, are no longer caught between marching armies. As we leave the halls of power and the scrolls of law, let us turn now to something quieter still, to the silent gardens that reflect the soul of this time. The Zen gardens that speak. Lost spiritual teachings of Kyoto temples, now we step away from the fields and courts. We leave behind the tax ledgers, the swords, the orders of generals, and the murmurs of the market. And we enter a space where silence is sacred, where even the rake leaves no sound, where nothing happens, and yet everything is present. We enter the Zen gardens of Kyoto. Imagine walking barefoot on polished wooden floors that creak gently with age. The air is cool and still. Shoji screens slide open with a whisper, revealing a dry landscape beyond, a rectangle of raked white gravel, dotted with carefully placed stones, moss islands, and quiet emptiness. No flowers bloom here, no water flows, and yet the space feels alive. These gardens, called karasansui, or dry landscape gardens, were not made to impress. They were never meant for crowds or festivals. They were built by monks and gardeners, sometimes together, sometimes over generations, for the sole purpose of reflection. Each line in the gravel is drawn with deliberate motion. Each stone is placed with intention. Each empty space is a presence in itself. You do not enter these gardens. You observe them, often from the temple veranda, quietly, humbly in meditation. They are not for walking, but for seeing. One of the most iconic gardens is Ryoan-ji in northern Kyoto. At first glance it seems simple, 15 stones arranged on a bed of white gravel. But no matter where you sit, you can only see 14. One is always hidden. Some say this is a lesson, that perfect understanding is impossible. Others believe it symbolizes the limitations of human perception, or the slow uncovering of truth over a lifetime. No inscription explains it. No guide tells you what to think. You simply sit and watch and breathe. Zen, at its core, is not about belief. It is about practice, quiet, daily, embodied. In the Edo period, it was practiced in temples nestled in forested hills or at the edges of cities, where monks lived simply, rising before dawn, sitting in meditation for hours, sweeping paths with handmade brooms, and reciting sutras in low rhythmic tones. But it was also practiced in gestures, the way tea is poured, the way a scroll is hung, the way a single flower is arranged in a vase. These too became disciplines of presence and simplicity. The garden was the world in miniature, and the world was a place to be studied not through conquest, but through stillness. Visitors to these temples were often samurai, poets, scholars, even generals like Tokugawa Ieyasu himself, who sought not thrill but quiet clarity. And yet over time many meanings were lost. Gardens were replicated, copied, stylized, but their spiritual essence became elusive. Some interpretations were written down, others passed orally, but most of the teachings, the subtle pauses, the quiet corrections of a master, the shared silence under falling snow, faded with time. What remains now are the forms, the raked lines, the standing stones, the gentle slopes of moss under pine. But even so, if you were to visit one of these gardens today, and simply sit and let your breath slow, you might feel what they felt. Not excitement, not enlightenment, but something softer, a kind of release, as if the world in all its noise had paused just long enough for you to be still. And in that stillness, you listen to the silence, a silence not empty but filled, with wind, with gravel, with the slow turning of time. Now let us gently rise and turn to our final reflection, a journey into the courts of the elite, where performance, status, and ritual became an art form, where masks concealed faces and emotion took form in movement. The no-theater court life, ritualized beauty and elite restraint. Let us now step into a darker space, not dark in feeling but in design. A narrow wooden stage lit by paper lanterns, the scent of cedar and incense rising gently into the air. A masked figure stands perfectly still, and then slowly and begins to move. This is no theater, not quite performance, not quite ritual. It is something in between, a living embodiment of stillness, precision, and memory. Developed in the 14th century and refined during the Muromachi and Edo periods, No was the preferred art form of Japan's elite. Unlike kabuki, which was loud, colorful, and popular with the masses, No was understated, controlled, sacred. A full No play could take hours, and very little would happen on the surface. A single gesture, a slow turn of the head, or the raising of a fan might represent an emotional transformation, a battle, or even the presence of a spirit. The actors wear masks, hand-carved from cypress wood, painted with natural pigments, and often hundreds of years old. Each mask represents a specific archetype: the old man, the young woman, the warrior, the ghost. But the mask never changes. It is the angle of the face, the subtle shift of the chin, the lighting, and the silence around it that gives it life. To the untrained eye, it might seem still, almost frozen. But to the court, to those who watched in complete silence from behind folding fans, every movement was rich with meaning. The audience did not applaud. They did not speak. They simply watched, patiently, respectfully, and often drowsily. It was not just entertainment, it was cultivation, of taste, of attention, of self-restraint. And this matched the rhythm of elite life in Edo, Japan. For the upper classes, especially those within the samurai aristocracy or the imperial court in Kyoto, daily life was not a rush of pleasures, but a quiet adherence to form. One was expected to write poetry, to arrange flowers, to compose music on the koto, and to appreciate subtle seasonal changes, like the sound of insects in early autumn or the shape of shadows on rice paper walls. Power was not displayed through wealth, but through refinement, a perfectly prepared bowl of tea, a poem composed on the spot, a subtle reference to a 10th century story. Even clothing spoke volumes, not through extravagance but through layered meaning. A noblewoman's kimono might feature plum blossoms in early spring, but pine needles in winter. Colors and patterns obeyed unspoken rules, and wearing the wrong motif in the wrong season could signal ignorance or even insult. In this world, discipline was beauty, and beauty was a form of moral order. Within the No theater, this ideal found its highest expression. Even the stage itself was sacred, modeled after a Shinto shrine with a symbolic pine tree painted on the backdrop and a bridgeway through which actors entered, as if crossing from another world. Some plays dealt with war or longing, others with ghosts and redemption. But always they moved slowly. Voices were deep, sometimes chant-like. Music came from flutes and drums, played in deliberate, measured rhythms. And the audience listened. They knew the story already. They did not come for surprise, but for stillness. For a familiar moment, performed perfectly once again. In this way, No reflected the very society from which it grew, elegant, immobile, ordered. It was a mirror held up not to life as it is, but to life as it should be, controlled, beautiful, and fleeting. Now, as the curtain of history draws gently closed, let us return, not to the stage, or the fields, or the courts, but to ourselves.